Hey everyone, welcome to an amazing virtual event. I'll let everyone kind of get in the room before we get started. Amazing. Hey everyone, my name is Adam Vitcavage. I run a website and podcast called Debutiful, where all I do and all I think about is debut books and their writers and their editors. And today you're here to see some amazing writers for the fall debut preview with Astra. Today we have three writers who have books coming out this fall: Devyn Defoe, author of Burnside; Nikki Ervice, author of Roadshow; and Ben Eastham, author of The Floating World. They will be talking with their editors so you can get a behind the scenes look at how these books came to be and what they're all about. Um, a little bit about Debutiful. Like I said, I have a website where you can see cover reveals, book lists, author interviews, and other behind the scenes things that make the debut world exist. And there's also a podcast version where the conversations you're hearing today, it's kind of a version of that where I interview the writer in depth for about 40 minutes about their journey to publication. So if you're interested about journeys and how books become books, definitely check out Debutiful. But today you're going to hear from some Astra writers and their editors. First up, we have Devyn Defoe. She is a writer and bookseller from Sacramento, California, a former Wallace Stegner Fellow. Her work has been published in Socrates on the Beach and the White Review. Burnside is her first novel. Burnside is the Lynchian absurdist debut novel about two disaffected young women and the local homeless man they become obsessed with. Our unnamed narrator, a bookseller at a used bookstore, and her roommate, September, a waitress at a cowgirl-themed restaurant, spend their days avoiding their deadbeat boyfriends, commuting to class on the raccoon-infested rat bus, and hanging out at wine bars with their friend Claudia Thursday. But after September has an encounter with a local homeless man named Burnside, she becomes terrified that he's stalking her. Soon, their entire town has turned on Burnside, convinced that he is responsible for violent wildfires surrounding them. Burnside, which will be published on August 4th, was acquired by Maya Rayford Cohen. And I'd love to bring up Devyn and Maya to have a great conversation about Burnside. Devyn, congratulations on publishing. Maya, thank you for acquiring this book, and I'll turn it over to you two.
Hi, thanks, Adam. Hi, Devin.
Hey.
Um, yeah, thanks for introducing it so well. This book is so kind of hard to describe. A lot of times when I do it, I just kind of like list some of the surreal, wacky elements. Among them, there's a veterinary astrologist who only adopts dying cats. There's a town of feral children who live in the abandoned wreckage of an old sort of Central Valley almond town. There's an actor who's cast in a propaganda video for a prominent alien cult. And there's a landlord, an elderly landlord who poisons her tenants and buries them in the backyard. There's just like kind of a little bit of everything in this book. I feel like the first time I read it, I just over and over again, and every time I reread it, I'm like, how did she come up with this? It's all so spectacular. And yeah, it's just like eerie and erudite and hilarious. But one of the things that I remember, I think I bought this um, during a set of particularly sort of ferocious fires that were happening in California at the time. And that's really kind of the backdrop for this novel. Um, and there's, you deal with it with a lot of levity at times, the unofficial fire officials and like, the towns and the smoke and people going to sit on the patios and drink at the wine bars, even though, they're choking on the, dead bodies of all of the people in the neighboring towns. But it's, I think it was really interesting to me because this is such a California novel, which is where I grew up as well. Um, Devin and I grew up about an hour away from each other. And so I really am curious how you were really theorizing California and Burnside. What about the state, I think, offers a really rich container for the book about this sort of contemporary moment of overlapping crises. Had you always intended to write a novel about the state, or did that just feel incidental? I also think there's so many great California writers that I see here. Like I see Joan Didion, I see Mike Davis. So I'm curious, like as a sort of jumping off point, like how this became such a sort of place-based work of fiction.
Totally. I think that is kind of just how that's kind of the only way I can write. Like I really need to latch onto a environment and kind of understand, like I really need to understand the weather of a place to sort of know how it's affecting the characters and sort of how they feel in their bodies, and in their minds. And I wanted to write about fires, obviously. Just I think at the time I started this in 2019. There were like severe fires throughout California, both NorCal and SoCal at the time. So it was just kind of everywhere. Yeah, I always, in terms of like California in general, I always go back to that Didion quote, which I'm gonna butcher terribly, but it was like, this is like things have got to work out here because this is where we run out of continent. Like it's a very sort of manifest destiny kind of understanding of the state. And it always gets me because like those, kind of the motion of capitalist expansion doesn't end at the coast. It just kind of, you know, transmutes and like takes on new forms and like grows. And in California, you have like this political landscape where there's just unfathomable wealth and extreme poverty. And it's just kind of this political tinderbox in a way for kind of these dynamics. But yeah, I think the housing crisis was something that was definitely on my mind during the book and stuff, and kind of all these different things.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's really great. I love that Didion quote too. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I feel like as Californians, it kind of looms large a little bit too, and the sort of cycle of booms and busts in this state, um, and yeah, there's like a Karl Marx, like there's one that I think a lot of sort of California Marxists turn to a lot, which is like he like wrote a friend, and he was like, I would love if you could send me some literature about California because I'm very interested in like, do you know what I'm talking about? Like the way,
No, I don't. I
yeah,
would
and
love
I think
to
he was
read
like,
that though.
it's really interesting. He's like, I'd love if you could send me. He's like, thinking about California and my like sort of it was apparently very essential to Marx and his sort of formulations of when he was writing
Wow.
Capital.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the state's really interesting and there's also sort of gestures to like prisons too, which obviously, Ruth Wilson Gilmore and Golden Gulag are also, I think, also she's a really essential theorizer of the state and just about this sort of prison ecosystem, especially in the Central Valley. And there's a funny character in the opening who's like, I mean, I won't give it away, but it's still it's a very like kind of. I mean, you deal, I think, with these big ideas with a lot of sort of humor, dark humor, which is like part of the charm, and
Yeah. I think
that's
like California politics especially are so absurd as well. Like thinking
yeah.
about private prisons and in the current governor race, the most progressive candidate is, Tom Steyer, who made
Hmm.
his billions on private prisons. So just kind of ridiculous things.
Yeah, you're right. There is a lot of sort of absurdism.
Yeah.
Like when you think about the state. Um, yeah, which gives me my next question that I think, despite the moments of absurdism and also it's really like sort of suburban setting, this is a really deeply political book. And I think at the center, as I've sort of been formulating, how I've been pitching it, I more and more am thinking about this as a sort of political coming of age novel, with the two main characters, September and our unnamed narrator, who, by way of this sort of homeless man, Burnside, um, and the way that the town comes to sort of think about him as a scapegoat or as relatively benign or otherwise, something in between. The two characters really like kind of diverge, I think, in their sort of, political thinking about the role of this homeless man in their community. Um, I think it's, in that way where at some point, around the age of like 19 to 22, the people that you grow up with, you're like, oh, maybe our politics don't align as much as I once thought. Um, and so this book does that really well. And so I think, but there's also really, cut-in criticisms, obviously, about the housing crisis, but also about masculinity. I think that that's a real driving point in this book about, this sort of perniciousness of patriarchy and the sort of quotidian humiliations of being a girl. And a little bit of like a sort of male loneliness epidemic gesture towards that. Like there's just a lot of losers in this book, like really like abject losers.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, how are you, what were the political concerns really that animate this novel? But how are you also anatomizing precarity, danger, victimhood, safety? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it's a book about fear. It can be profoundly damaging to the psyche, but and have repercussions in society, but it's also kind of a rational reaction at times to, the threats that women and these girls experience and perceive from the men around them. Um, and it can't always be localized into like specific instances. It's kind of a series of wounds throughout their lives, starting from young ages to, so it's kind of the psychic damage of, first instance, they're like sexualized as girls, and then every subsequent interaction that's, threatening or violating or dehumanizing. But then there's this like other layer to it that like the things that make them vulnerable to danger in these ways, their youth and gender and sexuality are to an extent like assets they can trade in on and wield and to some financial or social success in different spheres. Um, and both, September and the narrator kind of are aware of this and internalize it in different ways. September is maybe kind of more pragmatic about it. She sort of cashes in on it in a different way. She's really under no illusions about her standing with men and how they see her, and she kind of just accepts this. And it's a calculation that she, makes to get some sort of benefit. Um, just so otherwise she'd get nothing. And then you have the narrator who's kind of internalizing more of the grief from her experiences with men. She takes it really hard when the men in her life don't really see her as fully human or don't treat her as an intellectual equal, especially like men she's in relationships with or was. And she kind of just like resents that she has to participate in a society that denies her her full personhood. And I think that is what makes her feel more aligned with those who are kind of on the outs from society, those who don't really have capital to trade, either by choice or circumstance. So, um, yeah, they kind of arrive at divergent views. I do think like the absurd elements of the book are like pretty, they're also like totally political as well, just because we live in, absurd political moments. But yeah, that was kind of how I was thinking about it. I also kind of, when I write, I sort of don't really know the questions that I'm asking all the time and just kind of writing towards these, writing to answer questions I didn't know I had. And then I have to sort of go back through and do an autopsy on the book to sort of figure out where all the kind of pieces lie. So I think it was like somewhat unconscious during the actual writing, but that was kind of, you know, where it kind of arrived to.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Um, I like the phrase autopsy on the book. My last quick question is this is, like I said, such a fun, inventive book, and one of the things I love most is the naming structure. You'll notice when folks open it that everyone has a really ridiculous nickname or euphemism attached to them. Very few characters actually have just like straightforward names. How did that schema kind of come about, and who is your favorite name?
It was originally a very like early model for the book when I was just starting out was Milkman by Anna Burns, which is one of my all-time favorite books. It just has this like the coolest syntax, and everyone in that book has weird names that are just sort of like descriptors of who that character is, but kind of also clues as to uh, their actions later on in the book and like how they're going to be known. So that was kind of the start of it. I don't think any of those names originally, the original names aren't what, ended up being the names, but there's a line early on in the book that is like the girls are talking about how they, people who've done them wrong, they like will rescind their names from their vocabulary, and uh, sort of speak them out of existence in that way. So it's kind of a clue for the rest of the book, that, maybe the people with strange names are not necessarily to be trusted fully. And my favorite name, I think, is Simp Carl. I don't really know why. He just like you said, the book is full of losers, and I think that is one that, just totally pins him for who he is. I kind of like dragging him into things and seeing him just kind of be a loser. Um, do you have a favorite name?
Yeah, Simp Carl, by the way, it's Simp.
Yeah,
For those, yeah, I would say my favorite name is September because at first glance you kind of think that it's a regular name, and then later on there's a fun reveal about
yeah,
why she's named September, and so you kind of have to figure out for yourself why she's named that, and it's just really clever. But yeah,
yeah.
right there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. One of my favorite songs of all time is a song called Losers by the Bell Brigade. And the hook is like, we are all born losers. I'm pro loser in my household.
Yeah.
Uh, Devyn and I thank you so much for talking. Devyn, I'm going to ask all the writers this because I also came up through the bookstore industry. But Devyn, what's your favorite local independent bookstore that you support? And I'm sure you have an answer, but that people can also maybe pre-order from if they're in the area.
Oh, I have to say Beers Books because I do work there. But there are so many great local bookstores in Sacramento. I really love them all.
Amazing. Yes, I also love supporting independent bookstores and any bookstores. Thank you both so much for talking. We're gonna, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat or there's a Q&A, and we'll get to them if we have time. But thank you, Devyn and Maya, for talking about Burnside.
Thank you.
Seven.
Um, Next up, we're going to transition to our next writer. Ben Eastham is the editor-in-chief of eFlux Criticism and was a founding editor of the White Review. His writing has been published in Art Review, eFlux, the London Review of Books, the New York Times, and other publications. His first novel, The Floating World, is a cautionary tale of a young, newly widowed art critic who goes to work curating a spectacular art exhibition for a mysterious billionaire determined to build a geodesic domed paradise to shelter the rich. Recognizing that this is a branding exercise for the ethically dubious property development, our protagonist is nonetheless attracted by the opportunity to work with an artist that he once hero worshipped, the reclusive, semi-retired Finn Wright, and to restart a life that stopped with the loss of his wife. At first glance, the floating world seemed like a paradise, but soon becomes clear that not all is well beneath the shimmering dome. The Floating World will be published on September 29th and was acquired by Patricia Van Dalen and Tara Sharma. Welcome all. Thank you so much for being here, and I can't wait to hear your conversation.
Thank you so much, Adam. Hello, everyone. I'm excited, incredibly excited to be speaking today with Ben and Patrizia. Like Adam said, Patrizia and I acquired Ben's brilliant novel, The Floating World, which comes out. We co-acquired it. It comes out here in Astra in September alongside Fitzcarraldo in the UK soon thereafter. There is so much that I just really love about this novel. It's been such a thrill to work on it, and yeah, so much to admire. I admire its conceptual architecture, its incredibly ambitious thematic terrain, exploring techno-utopian fantasy, art and its revolutionary affordances, ecological collapse, as well as the kaleidoscopic quality of grief and of love, all in a narrative that unfolds mostly beneath this giant geodesic dome on a Greek island. And there's also so much to love about the architecture of this novel's every sentence, its incredible sensitivity and sensory language, its wit and its levity, and its huge range. I could go on and on, but I do want to pass this right over to Ben and jump in. So maybe, Ben, we could start a little bit with the title, The Floating World. Could you tell us a little bit about where this title came from, the origins of the phrase, its meaning in the book, as well as its other thematic and literary resonances?
Yeah, thanks so much, Tara. And thanks to Adam as well for having me on here. And it was really nice to hear Maya and Devyn talk. I'm really looking forward to reading Burnside. And actually some interesting correspondences with what Devyn was saying, actually, with the floating world. I guess the title came from the fact that the book is really about the attempt to construct a world which is safe from the future and indeed safe from the present, and about the precariousness of the worlds in which we all live, both in the kind of obvious sense of living through a moment of, accelerating catastrophe, and also in the sense of uh, becoming aware that a world can fall apart very quickly in the wake of a death when you're mourning. And it's set on a Greek island, so there's this very literal sense that I wanted a title that reflected the precariousness of the world that it constructs, and also maybe conjures the image of a utopia on an island. And floating world seemed to fit those ideas. And then it's also a reference to an art movement that I particularly love and have been obsessed with for a long time, which is 19th century Japanese printmaking, which was called ukiyo-e, which translates literally as pictures of the floating world. And the floating world in that context was a pleasure district in Tokyo, and it was where the artists lived. I mean, pleasure district I'm using euphemistically. But it was where all the artists lived, and it was the kind of center of the literary world in Tokyo. Uh, and the printmakers who worked there produced these pictures, very cheap, kind of like posters that you could buy for, very little, for kind of the price of a bowl of noodles. And they were enormously popular. And the great masters of that tradition, who are Hiroshige and Hokusai, kind of transformed this very popular medium, this very simple form of poster making, almost like postcards, into this amazing kind of revolutionary mode of making art that's been enormously influential on really all two-dimensional art made since. And the floating world was this kind of world inside a world in Tokyo. It was this place that was removed from everyday life. It was a privileged, sheltered place. And that fitted with the idea of this utopia being a place that was a little bit removed from the world. I wanted to construct this world which was equally exciting and full of pleasure and enticing for its protagonist, but which was also ultimately built on darkness and exploitation, or at least these currents were there. So it provided a nice model for that, I think. Yeah, and just the idea of a world which is precarious, which might at any point fall apart or sink or be destroyed.
Hey Ben, hi everyone. The next question comes from me. Ben, you're talking a little bit about utopia already, but we are interested, or Tara and me are thinking a lot about your other writing and your nonfiction. You're a writer of nonfiction. You're also an editor yourself. Um, how did you manage, or were you attracted to fiction anyway to tell this story in particular, or did you find it challenging to? Because your last book is a book of nonfiction as well, and you write criticism about art, and art has a big role obviously here as well. But how did you decide about that switch to fiction, and how did you feel you
Yeah,
could
I
explore
mean,
those themes?
it was definitely a struggle. I can tell you that much. I mean, actually,
Because it
something
doesn't
that
read like a
Devon,
struggle at all.
good to hear.
It reads
But something
perfectly.
Devon said really struck me actually, which was this idea of when you're in the process of writing, you're answering questions you didn't know you had initially. And I think the book came out of it was a response to someone dying actually. And I wanted to write about this experience. And I just couldn't find a way to do it. I kind of started off with these sketches and ideas. And I realized as I wanted to give structure to the feelings and the ideas that this experience had catalyzed in me, that the only way to do it was to write fiction. And I think that's because a fiction, or certainly a novel, feels so much more capacious. You know, you can put so much more in there. You can be so much more uh, varied in the kind of registers or tones or ideas. And also you can build a world that you can then unbuild or destroy. And I think that feeling of constructing something or having a world that falls apart is something that really fiction is particularly well suited to doing, because you construct a world and then you can pull it apart or show how it's unreal. I mean, I guess maybe the floating world reflects that a little bit, the title, this sense of unreality. So I really wanted to find a form in which, yeah, it might be possible to imagine or to construct a space and to invite the reader into it and to make it feel as secure and as real as possible. And then gradually, by degrees, and maybe, to allow the reader to see as the novel develops that this world isn't secure, actually, that it's
Mm.
built on sand, so to speak, that it might fall apart at any moment and that it's vulnerable to all kinds of catastrophes. And I think fiction feels like a uniquely good model for that,
Mm.
which is maybe why fiction is such an important medium now, as all of our worlds begin to fall apart a little bit.
Yeah, that's a very powerful response. And just, yeah, I don't know, it makes me think about, yeah, the affordances of fiction, yeah, on the level of craft, and the way that, like, sort of part way, halfway-ish through the novel, like, there is, yeah, this sort of unraveling, almost on the kind of most atomic register, where our narrator's kind of sense of what's real and what's not starts to blur. And again, yeah, I think so much of that really powerful work is happening on the kind of smallest unit of language. And yeah, you spoke a little, you touched on this, but I would love to hear a little bit more about the circumstances in which you wrote this novel. You're currently speaking from a hotel room in Athens, and you were living in Greece when you wrote much of the novel. Can you tell us a bit about Athens as a reference point, about the time and place from which this novel came about?
Yeah, I'm very glad you pointed out to everyone watching that I don't actually live in a room with ferns painted on the wall. Yeah, I moved to, I mean, I guess I'd started working in Athens in 2017, actually, a long time ago. I worked on a massive exhibition which took place here, which is called Documenta, which is an enormous, maybe the biggest kind of regular art exhibition in Europe. And it kind of invaded Athens in 2017. And I was coming back and forth and working on it and was very intrigued by the kind of collisions that happened between this exhibition's aspirations to build local communities and to speak to certainly the kind of radical elements of Athenian society and the reality. And then I moved to Athens almost by accident in 2020. I'd come here to finish a book basically, and then COVID happened, and I got stuck, and I ended up living here for 4 years. And it was quite an amazing, strange time, obviously, to be living here through the lockdowns, which were very extended and very severe, and also to be living here through extreme forest fires, which kind of arrived on the corner of, into the suburbs of Athens, and I would wake up in the morning and I could see the fires stretching across the hills, and kind of it would rain ash. So those two things were obviously enormously influential, I think, certainly in the kind of direction the book took in its slightly apocalyptic register in moments. But also, I think Athens was very important in the kind of solidarity I saw actually in the area in which I was living, and the possibilities for community and support to kind of those huge migrant communities in the area in which I was living, and I became involved in that and ran a studio for a bit. And also then again in the other direction, my own anxiety about being about living there, and being very aware of my status as someone who wasn't working in Athens, who was surviving on money that was paid from the States and from the UK by virtue of my day job. And that very uncomfortable position, of being someone who loved the city and was as involved as I could be, but whose grasp of the language was limited. And seeing a city change around me, by virtue of tourists, really, and people living here who, had no connection to the place. So there was that tension there as well that I felt personally, and also I think probably comes through in the book as well, with its sense of, someone, the narrator, seeking out a kind of utopia, but also being aware of the conditions that underpin that possibility. So yeah, I guess it kind of bled into the book in a big way, and was generally just very influential on my thinking and on my kind of sense of geography as well. And I mean, maybe what Devyn was saying as well, Athens feels a little bit like it's in the future in some ways, like it's ahead of things in this curious way, because it's right at the kind of the forefront of the climate catastrophe, because it's the point in Europe in which is most kind of in which the crisis of fortress Europe and immigration is felt most acutely. So it feels like it's going through the things that are now beginning to, to affect everywhere else in Europe and the world. So I was intrigued by that sense of maybe being slightly in the future some way.
Yeah, totally. Ben, and we have to wrap up, but and it's maybe a big question to have 2 minutes on, but as you're saying, the narrator and how he's watching the worlds collapse around him, or maybe change, and what he thought was real is not real, and then he's surrounded by art and kind of obsessed with this artistic opening of this floating world that he's supposed to work on. And it sounds like you were in Athens for art, and that it might have helped you also to sort of, or not helped you, but you were seeing Athens through also the artworks that you were placing around in the documenta experience. But can you say maybe in a couple of sentences the role of art for the narrator and also for you, to sort of, is that the prism through which you manage to understand reality, or maybe see that you can't understand it really?
Yeah, it is a big question. I
2 minutes.
think, yeah, in terms of what art does, I've always been really committed to this idea, which I guess is best articulated by John Berger, that art changes the way you see, or it constructs the way you see, or the way you look at art, the way you experience art. And this is art in the broader sense. I think all culture, literature, whatever you consume, changes the way that you see the world, and that good art and art that's important is not only a kind of isolated experience, but something that you bring out into the world and that changes your relationship to the world in which you live and the people with whom you have a relationship and the society in which you operate and how you operate in that society. So I wanted to make a book that really, in which the works of art that are touched on in the book are integral to the way that the narrator sees the world around him, and in fact construct the world around him, and to see how to experiment with that idea, actually, that, what we see is conditioned by what we read, what we look at, and how we read and how we look at things, and what we choose to see and choose to ignore. So I think art serves that function. Yeah. It's supposed to be a way of seeing, let's say.
Mm.
I love ending 15-minute conversations on the biggest question. So thanks for squeezing that in, Ben, in 2 minutes when I know you could talk about it for hours probably. Thank you all three of you so much for talking about the floating world. Ben, I also want to ask you a bookstore that you like to support, either in Athens or wherever in the world, a bookstore you just want to shout out.
Politeia in Athens. Actually, I was there this afternoon, so it's on my mind. And in London, Burley Fisher Books, which is around the corner from my house and is great. Thank you, Adam.
Terrific. I love yes. Thank you all three so much. And again, if there's time at the end, if there's questions, we'll bring everyone back and hopefully have a little Q&A, but maybe not. Thank you all. And now I want to transition to our final writer and editor conversation. Next up, we have Nikki Ervice, who was the winner of the VQR Emily Clark Belch Prize for Fiction. Her work has appeared in the VQR, the Iowa Review, Colorado Review, Washington Square Review, Passages North, and elsewhere. She is a professional dancer. A side note, I have no rhythm, so anytime I see a dancer, I'm like, wow, how do you do this? She's a professional dancer and writer from Alaska who holds an MFA in fiction from Brooklyn College. In her debut novel, Roadshow, we follow Annie as she leaves her life of a bartending and dancing in New York on a cross-country road trip to an Alaskan town where she grew up to meet Vera, her mother, who abandoned her when she was only a few days old. When she receives a letter informing her that Vera is dying, she wants to meet her, Annie borrows a Buick and sets out on an exhausting journey through the Midwest into Canada, dancing where she can in an attempt to refill her dwindling reserves of cash and sustain her on the road. Sexy and fast-paced, yet deeply felt, Roadshow explores the power of passion, inheritance, legacy, and class, and a grueling, smiling work on stage in the hospitality industry. Roadshow will be published on November 11th and was acquired by Emily Bell. Nikki and Emily, welcome. Thank you so much for being the last of the three and sitting patiently in the waiting room. I will turn it over to you all.
Thanks, Adam. Hi, Nikki. Hi, everybody. That was great, especially Ben's last answer to that last question. It's kind of why I do this work. So fun to hear him talk about that, and very fun to talk about a tonally completely different book than the other two, but still deeply concerned with art and the artist's life. So, what first, Nikki? I want you to tell people where you live because it's very interesting to me.
Yes, I am from, two places, Halibut Cove, Alaska, which is a little island community, and then Homer, Alaska. So that is, I lived in New York for 10 years and have lived other places, but born and raised here. And now I am living here again. So I'm in my friend's guest room with better Wi-Fi than I have in the cabin I'm living in right now.
Well, that's necessary for this kind of an event on the internet. So as Adam said, Nikki is a professional dancer. This book is about a woman named Annie who also is a professional dancer. And I was talking with Nikki before and telling her that I recently went to the ballet with a friend who was a professional ballerina. And she and I were talking about how she felt her role as a dancer was to fulfill or enact the vision of the choreographer, like she was the tool by which the artist created their artwork. And Nikki, I'm curious if you felt that way as a dancer, and then how that contrasts with your role as the writer, like the person with the vision, trying to convey a story and emotional stakes, et cetera, and what it is to be able to do both, because that's quite unique and also obviously in two different art forms.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely relate to your friend. That's actually a lot of the reason that I got into writing. I was kind of having a crisis of self. I was, working in the hospitality industry and dancing a ton for like four different companies, freelancing. And I was just under constant surveillance, like everything that you do, even though it's something that you love, and maybe there's a great sense of community in what you're doing, at the same time, like you are subject to like constant critique. And so your self is always being subsumed into someone else's vision. And so I started writing like in 2018, just like notes app poetry on my like after shifts or between rehearsal and work. And that just felt like this way, I wanted to have that like sense of autonomy and control over what I was doing. And so then when that all went away in the pandemic, restaurant closed, my tour to Europe for a dance company was canceled, and all of a sudden I could like sit down. Then I started to write fiction and started with short fiction, and it was kind of this beautiful way to feel like I could really just like exert that control. Like anywhere, like obviously there's parameters and constraints of the form, but anywhere I wanted to go, I could. And but the difficulty of that too is that like in dance, you can kind of have someone to blame. If I could say the work's not good, it's, the choreographer's fault, or, oh, the stage was slippery, or whatever in that moment. And in a book, I'm like, well, yeah, like there's obviously layers of like intervention where, Emily helped me edit it. Of course, you helped me edit it. But then like also, it's still like suggestions. And really it's like this is yours, and you said it. So
Yeah. I love that. I think often about or thought often about control with this book in particular, and power dynamics and gendered power dynamics, and the power of her sexuality and sensuality and the ways in which she kind of wields it. And I don't know, I'm curious about, as a dancer, that kind of rush of being on stage and like holding an audience captive, and like how that, because as a writer, like you have no idea what the reader is responding to, like which moments they feel like especially like sticky and exciting to them, or other moments where they're like thinking about what they're making for dinner when they're ostensibly like reading. But when you're on stage, like you got to know, right? Like when you're in the zone and when you're like locked in with your audience. And I don't know. I mean, do you miss that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I do. I've been performing a little up here in like little productions that my friends put on. So that is kind of fun where I still have some element of that, but I do obviously miss doing it at the level that I was doing it at. And yeah, I mean, it's such a crazy thing because I think, it's a kind of strange, ineffable thing, like whether you're doing something very small scale or like I think especially stepping onto like a proscenium stage where you like can't see the audience and there's just kind of blackness out there, and but you can feel if they're on your side. Like you can feel if you're doing the thing correctly. And I think that so much of that control, like in regards to the audience, is really like control of the self. And like there's so much front loading that goes into a performance, so whether it's like years of training or you've been working on that show, for a year, or just every day for hours and sweating. And so like there is this really interesting thing, like this belief in like the control of yourself that has to like transmit outward. And I think that you can like and also when the audience is watching you, there is like a parasympathetic thing that happens where like their muscles are actually triggered by what you're doing. So there's like very fascinating like puppeteering that you can almost do. I mean, it's not, you can only control yourself in that, really. And so really it's all about you trying to like transmit a thing. But it is a really powerful feeling. And I do, it's incredibly heady. And there's times when I've like not liked to work, or I've been like, oh, I'm so nervous, I've got stage fright, I don't want to go on stage. And then like you go out there and this very strange alchemy happens and you feed off of each other. And then you come back and you're like, I never want to do anything else in my life. This is
Yeah.
it.
Do you think we have this Zoom audience held captive the way you just described with our conversation?
I cannot, that was one thing I did have to teach a little dance like online in the pandemic. And I was like, this is bizarre because I genuinely cannot feel any of that energy. And so you kind of just have to, again, like, I'm just believing that we are captivating people out there.
I've said some very strange things on Zoom calls and been like, we'll never know. We'll never know. So going back to the beginning of the novel, I know I've said this to you and in descriptive copy, etc., but the book really reminds me of Stephanie Danler's Sweet Bitter, which I read on submission a zillion years ago. And I was working as an editorial assistant and I worked at a restaurant, like a fine dining restaurant in New York. And with most like restaurant books and industry books, I feel that they don't really like capture what it really feels like to be in and among that world. But yours does, and it was very fun and sort of. I'm not like a nostalgia person, but I did start like sweating a little bit when I was reading it. I was like, oh god. But one thing that I find so interesting about that world, both like front of house and back of house, is this like need to feel like cool, like and that and like the power dynamics there, and again to be like in control, and you see that with Annie, our main character's relationship with she has like a romantic relationship with the head chef at the restaurant where she works. And I wonder about like writing those scenes and how you manage to do it without making them feel cringy. And obviously just the way you've just talked about dance, like you have like a deep institutional knowledge of the places that you've been, and you kind of they like seem to live within you and then come out. But I'm curious about the actual act of writing them, how you did it so convincingly.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the actual act of writing, that is again such another like ineffable thing, like the act of writing. Like, what was that like? But I do
I
think
don't know why you guys do it. It seems crazy to me, but I'm glad you do.
But no, I think, coolness functions in such an interesting way. And like, I think both the dance industry and the hospitality industry, and like, yes, it is like it's such a necessary element. And I think it's because there's this like self-abnegation that has to happen when you step into those spaces. I love Sweet Bitter, by the way. Love Sweet Bitter. And I think that it really captures a particular type of striver. You are entrenched in this scene where you like have access to these really wealthy people and they want your knowledge, but you are still a servant and you really can't show up messy or how you want to be, and it's going to get chaotic. And so like I feel like cool is this way of like maintaining a sense of like a veneer, a sense of boundary of self. And so I think like, yes, I just really do understand these people. Like these people, I don't have reverence for these characters. I have respect, but I think they're silly in some ways. But I do like love them and respect them and understand their struggle to like feel intimacy when they are kind of being told and shown all the time that like intimacy and like showing who you are is the wrong thing. So like you're only supposed to trot out certain aspects of your personality. So I feel like in these scenes, like writing them, I was just very conscious about the fact that they're going to kind of like always miss each other in some way, that the intimacy is going to be sort of like effaced. And like he does, he in the back of house does have to like deal with these things, but she has more of that. And so there is like a hierarchy there. Like she still is never going to like solicit him directly, and so I think I'm glad I alluded cringe. That's great to hear. You don't know, I don't know that that's happening when I'm writing, so thank you for that validation.
You are very welcome. I'm allergic to that stuff, so we would not be here if it were cringy. So I as much as we're talking about like how well you capture these like very cool industries, I do want to talk about the fact that the book like has this incredible emotional arc, and especially at the end is very moving. And I don't know, I mean, these are difficult questions, but like how you manage to tap into that and strike that balance. Like you never lose this overarching tone and style, and even a little bit of like distance. The narrator has a distance, for many good reasons. But at the end, she really, and these are some of my favorite books, is where often it's the first person and the narrator, like the plot, such as it is the main character like cracking open over the course of a book. And so, yeah, I'm just curious how you balance that, where you found the moments where you needed to like in a measured way let the reader into Annie's interior world.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was aware because this is a very personal book. Like, it's very much fiction. Like, none of these things happened. I am not this character, but at the same time, like, I'm so aware of like her condition. I think I knew that, like, sure, there could be like a style or like a coolness to the style, if that's the way we want to talk about it. But like, I couldn't be all form and no substance. It couldn't be all style and no substance. And a lot of the questions that I think Annie is asking herself throughout this book were like questions that I really came in, like, why is she so obsessed with this? How is her obsession taken advantage of under like current economic and social modes? Like how, there has to be something underneath there. I think underneath that coolness, like I said, as if that's a form of protection, even if the style of the book is a form of protection, I knew I had to get at something deeper and more emotional underneath all of that, because I think that often that sort of style is hiding all of this like pain and struggle and inquiry, and so I had a lot of that just inside of me writing this about these industries and what I had been up to. And so I was like, how do I transmute that through this character?
Yeah. And just in the last few minutes, I mean, everybody has talked about wildfires, and they show up in Roadshow as well, as Annie is driving across the country and then up through Canada into Alaska. She is the wildfires are quite present. But I am curious about the landscape writing. I mean, it's beautiful in the contrast of like the sort of cockroach infested New York City studio, and then it kind of just like breaks out into this like wide open vista. And I mean, I assume you've done the drive yourself, but I just am curious about landscape writing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I have done the drive myself a couple times through different routes. And I mean, I just like, part of it is I love New York because I say that like in New York, sort of like the people shape the landscape. Like that's sort of what you're responding to. And then like in Alaska and in Canada and Yukon and in the Yukon and these wilder places, like really the landscape is kind of shaping you more. And so I think growing up in these places too, I just have such a deep respect for it because it's so dangerous. It's so beautiful, but it's so dangerous. Like the other day, I went out in my dad's boat and I needed to get from point A to point B, and I got in, 6-foot like seas, which for people that don't know, that's really 12 feet. And like I wasn't equipped to do that, and an oar fell in front of my door and I couldn't get out, and the reverse went out, and like it was a whole thing. And that was just me trying to like live my life.
Yeah.
And it can just so quickly become dangerous. And I think there's something so incredibly like beautiful about all of that too, is just knowing that you're like your imminent death and humanity is like so present in these landscapes, and you can kind of be subsumed into them in a really interesting way. So yeah.
Yeah, on that happy note. I love it. It's great.
Love ending on a happy note. Nikki and Emily, thank you so much. Nikki, I'd love to know a bookstore you love in New York, in Alaska, somewhere in between. Who can you shout out?
I think I'll do two. The Homer bookstore here in Homer, Alaska, pretty much like one of the only. I love them. They're great supporters of local writers. And then I love Greenlight in Brooklyn, just have spent a lot of money there, and they're always great with recommendations. So
Terrific. Thank you both so much. I will land this river raft as we end the Astra debut fall preview. I want to thank Astra for inviting me. I, again, talk about debuts all day, every day. And Astra has truly put out some incredible books. I'm just going to shout out a few others other than these three amazing books. The Oldest Bitch Alive by Morgan Day, Underspin by E.Y. Zhao, Happy Bad by Delaney Nolan. I can go on and on. Foreclosure Gothic by Harris Lothy. One of my favorite books since I've been doing Debutiful, Mouth by Paloma Ghosh. All Astra. So if you're here, you obviously know Astra does amazing work. Their editors do amazing work. Their writers are doing amazing things. How many times can I say amazing to end this? Thank you again, Astra. Thank you again to Devyn, Ben, Nikki, and all the editors. You can pre-order their books now. Pre-ordering makes the world go round. So if you're thinking you're going to buy it later, buy it now. Trust me. In the chat, I'm also just dropping links to Debutiful, more author interviews, cover reveals, book lists, podcasts, if you're into that sort of thing. But again, coming out this fall, let me get my notes up. We have Burnside coming out August 4th. The Floating World coming out September 29th, and Roadshow coming out November 11th. Pre-order today and make these writers' lives a little bit easier on pub day. But thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Adam. I'll end this like I end my podcast. This was Astra House fall debut preview, and you're all beautiful. Thank you for being here.